Do we have any remote? We do. Oh. One person. Shall we give Brian another minute or?
Yeah, I'm surprised he's not here.
Well, he wasn't at the last meeting, so we can probably go ahead and start. So just to remind everyone, we're going to call the meeting to order and just remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded. And we are going to start with minutes from the December 20th meeting. The draft minutes were sent out to members. Did anybody have any changes?
I have one on page 2, second paragraph.
Hold on.
Second sentence. And where it says I added that 15 to 20% of young adults are living with their parents, it should read 50% of people between 18 and 28. Or 29, I can't remember exactly, was the statistic I was quoting on that one.
50%
Yes.
of people between
between 18 and 28 or 29, I can't remember
18 and-
exactly what it was.
okay. Thank you.
And that is a
Anyone else?
Yeah, the paragraph just before that. Very last sentence.
Page 3,
Excuse me, page 2.
page 2.
Yep, top paragraph, very last sentence. And the board may decide to move forward with reducing the required acreage to 3. I think that should say the board may move forward with asking the voters. You know, because it has to go to a vote. We
Because
can't
that's go
decide
to, yeah.
Yep, makes sense. And then on that same page,
Or you could say proposing,
yeah, yep,
reducing the acreage.
2. Same page. The 5th paragraph down, when it starts with Connie asked. Second sentence, Bruce responded about the appeal court. I think that should have been George.
I guess it was me.
You agree, George?
Yes.
That was you that stated that? And on that same paragraph at the bottom where it says he pointed out that about Merrimack, that was that he was actually, that was me, that was Bruce.
Anybody else have any changes? On that end? No?
Make a motion to accept the amended minutes.
Second,
We'll do a roll call vote. George?
yes.
Bruce?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
great. Thank you. Motion carries. We're a couple minutes shy of the hearing for the subdivision and Craig's just coming in, so we're going to give him a minute to get settled. Yeah. We can move on to some of the old business because I think it's pretty quick. The update on Doug Guy's minor subdivision, Murray took the documents over to the Hillsborough County Registry of Deeds. And they returned the check for the L-chip fee, which we're confused by. So I will follow up with them before returning the check just to make sure or get the reason why. that was returned. The NFIP preliminary flood maps review. Those were posted on the town website with a notice went out to all subscribers. And I believe it was also shared on the town Facebook page. I got a couple of questions more about how to find the documents to review than about anything specific. I did do a call with FEMA just to find out what the process is going forward. If there are people do have comments or questions, we'll just send them their way. And we do have a little bit more time to submit comments or questions or concerns on those preliminary maps, but likely they would go into effect early 2024. So we should be ready for that, work on that next year. Is there any, let's see. Driveway is next on the agenda.
Yeah, nothing.
Nothing at this time. Tax maps, nothing new, I don't think. Yep. Okay. 6. Let's see, I can quickly share that the master plan natural resources inventory, the Conservation Commission received some draft maps from Moosewood Ecological that they're going to be reviewing at their next Conservation Commission meeting. That's on January 11th at 6 p.m. here, I believe, in this room. They're not out to the public yet. They're just preliminary maps, but they looked pretty good. So that's exciting to get a deliverable on that. And let's see. On the SWRPC review, I'm waiting for a letter of commitment from SWRPC. And I spoke with her Lisa Murphy last week, who's working on that. She was out for personal reasons, but is back in the office now. So I expect that between now and our next meeting. Let's see, it's 7:07, almost 7:08. I think I'm not gonna start anything else right at this moment. We can move over to the Rowe subdivision. We won't open the hearing portion just yet, but I can just let people know it's a continuation of a hearing that we started back in December 6th, I think was the first hearing. It's for 4 lot line adjustments and a minor subdivision. It doesn't look like all the other property owners are here for this hearing, but we did approve the lot line adjustments at the December 6th hearing, and we were waiting on perk tests approval from our town health inspector for the septic and soils data. So that is why it has been postponed until tonight. And at 7:10 is when we're scheduled to open the hearing portion of that. The documents did come sort of late in the day today, which were emailed to all the planning board members, but they have not been posted yet, but Keith has them and he can show them on the big screen, share them with our viewers online. Oh, great. How can I keep splashing? Yeah. I have. Great. Sure. Oops, sorry. I don't need that. So it is 7:10, so I will open the hearing and Craig, maybe if you could start by just going over the changes since the last hearing. Thank you for using the microphone. And maybe introduce yourself as well.
I even know, I had to figure out how to run it after 3 times. I'm Craig Francisco with Bedford Design Consultants. Since last time we set the monuments here, and then these ones and these two, I submitted state subdivision approval for the lot 24-1.
Sorry, you did get it or you?
We did get it, yes.
Great. Can you get
And
a
it's-
copy of that to the town?
I did not bring a copy, I don't
Okay,
believe.
email is fine.
Okay, I did note the approval number on the plan. Where it is here. ESA 2022. I can't read it upside down, but it's note number 11 has it. Well, it's on sheet T1, not S. I added a note that this well is abandoned because they said it had a lead pipe going.
The
past.
abandoned well, yep.
Remember that? And this well was not in use. And this well is services both 25 and 25-1.
And is that in a note? Sorry, I can't see out of one eye right now. So is that in the notes?
It's right beside the well symbol.
Okay,
Tell me which page are you doing now?
T3.
okay, yep, I can see it on my electronic copy.
3 more
Did you hear from Brian?
right there. What else do we do?
I just wonder if we could just pause for a moment. Russ is our alternate planning board member and it looks like we do have an empty seat at the table and he's been following this case along. So I'd like to just officially appoint him to serve for this meeting as a regular member. Thank you, Russ. Do you want to take this copy? Because I can't really look at it. This electronic. So really the well was the only change, is that correct? So,
Well, we set the monuments.
and the monuments, right?
Yes, that's it.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions, any board members, or actually we'll start with questions from the audience. Does anyone have any questions from the public regarding this? Any board members? Did you have questions, Russ?
I had 2 questions. One was concerning, I think the chapter you guys did on the new lot. And I was just wondering if that was 75 feet from the lot. You have no structures or anything to be within 75 feet. So I would feel that. Would you honest?
Yes. Yes, it is 70. It is more than 75 feet. Yes.
And then the other question I had was for the bidder, 5/8/24. If earlier you mentioned the assets coming down to the north. And you have to cross the development and then right after that, I really steep slope. But it looks like the 4K area is down here close to Hudson. Maybe you think that that's where you're gonna build, it's probably down there. So would you maybe need like a driveway with the intent, some point to come off and second.
Can you give him the microphone, please?
The lot that has the property on Hill Road, the intent is to come off of Hill Road.
Cross the wetland.
Yeah, there's a narrow there that's only 5 feet wide. That's where it would go across. We would need to get a permit from the state for that. So that'll come later, but that's where we would like the driveway to come up there.
And you've already talked to Kent Perry about that, is that right?
Yes.
I guess my question was that why 4K area is way down to Hudson? The Chester. Because that would be where we could reach.
Well,
To be blunt, access for the backhoe.
Okay, so.
Rather than, yeah, just to meet your checklist requirement of a test pit in a 4K area.
I was just wondering if that was really where the intent, if the house was down there. If you guys tested it, maybe you got to use it.
No, but the excavator was on Hudson Road, so we're digging a pit there, so it was a lot easier and quicker to do too right there.
Any other questions, concerns? No. Anyone here? No.
I believe that Pete Caswell signed off on the test pit.
He
And that
did,
was our
yes.
last requirement. That was our last requirement that we had before approving
Right,
final approval.
right,
And then it appears that that request has been met.
right. So, Pete is going to provide something in writing to us in reference to that particular requirement, which is section 4.07 that refers to the soils data. And the only other thing I had was the outstanding state subdivision approval. And then obviously the other permits, which is pretty standard language, which would go in the conditions of approval. Which just says federal and local approvals shall be obtained should you move forward. And then the other one is not a condition, but you probably heard this. Sorry, are you able to? I know I can't see you, so you might have to do this if you can't hear me, because I can't tell what you're motioning. The only other thing was, as you heard for the last subdivision, because there's a significant amount of wetlands on the property, that we will indicate in the notice of decision that you're aware of that, we're aware of that, and that you will seek state approval as necessary. So that would be the motion that I would need if someone would care to make that. I mean, I always ask you, should I pass it on?
Sure.
So it's the motion to approve with those three.
Yeah, so I make a motion to approve the subdivision as presented, subject to the 3 conditions just talked about, including wetlands located, activities on wetlands, have appropriate wetlands approval authority approval. Written approval of the subdivision has been received by the Temple Health Officer, and any other necessary state, federal, local approvals are obtained before obtaining a building permit, and it's becoming final.
Second.
I'll give you that in writing, Olivia. So we will, we actually didn't officially close the hearing portion, so we should do that, and then the motion. So that's 7:19 for closing the hearing. Then there's the motion, and we'll do a roll call vote to approve.
Yes.
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 Yes,
Yes.
Yes.
perfect. So, thank you all. The motion carries. I think I still need the checks for the Registry of Deeds from you. Great. And we need the
And
Mylars. Which you have ready to go. And we will sign, we will get Pete's signature, and I will let you know when they're ready to be filed. But we did give an amount at the last meeting for the Registry of Deeds, correct? Does anybody
Yes.
remember what that amount was?
I do not.
Is it 4 pages that we said we're going? Yes, so one for the L chip. 25. So they're both to Hillsborough County Registry of Deeds. Like I wrote this down somewhere. What, so the L chip one is 25. Yep.
And what was the second amount?
If you're 26. For
26.
each one, 26 times 4.
104.
On the application there.
Yeah, but I'm wondering, is it 20, there's like a 24 per page plus the $2 fee, so it's
So it's 20, okay, it's 24 times 4 plus 2.
plus 2.
Yeah, so 98.
Thank you.
98.
98.
Both made out of Hillsborough County Registry of Deeds.
Yes. And I will get you the notice of decision and the findings of fact document. And we'll let you know when we get over to the Registry of Deeds. And once everything's signed. We're a couple minutes early still for the,
I was gonna say you want to move on to the full agenda or something.
sure. Did everyone have a chance to review we're going to move on to a couple of things on the agenda while we have a few minutes. The annual report. I sent out a draft after the last meeting. Is there any comments, questions, revisions? Did everyone read it? You did. That's
I had one comment, but I'll send it to you.
okay. Yeah, we were gonna make some changes based on what we end up presenting
Yep.
for the ADUs.
That's right.
Right. Okay. Do we want to talk about the next thing now, or is that going to take a little more time? It's the planning board clerk responsibilities.
In 7 minutes.
So Olivia has resigned effective the end of January, very sadly, as our planning board clerk. So over the next month, we'll be coming up with a job description and identifying what would be needed for the next person to take over. And there's a lot of filing involved in that as well. And we're sad to lose you, Olivia. So if anyone has any thoughts or anything you want to share on that, please. Anyone want to volunteer to work with us to come up with job description? Keith will probably rope you in to help with the filing bit, just so we know how we can transition. I think you've been involved a bit already in that part. Anybody else?
Shall we put that on the website?
Sure. Yeah, Olivia and I will meet over the next couple of weeks and come up with a description. We kind of hashed around a couple of different ideas, wondering if it's going to be 2 positions, if it's going to be just one person to do minutes and the board takes over the filing, at least for now, because it is a big job and a bit overwhelming. And Olivia, did you want to say anything about it? Okay. So that's going to be happening. And I think I mentioned I'm away the end of the month. So I did ask Olivia if we don't get everything done before I leave, if she'd be willing to put in just a couple of hours to help. If, transition, she is willing to do that, but not as a minute taker, just purely as an organizational type of session. So just share that. So thank you, Olivia, for your years of service, and yeah, you will be missed. Yes, you will. We have one more meeting. 7:26. Upcoming webinars and conferences. Boy, we're cruising right through. I did take some other things off the agenda so that we can focus on the ADU stuff. There is the usual monthly planning lunches at noon. That's the Office of Planning and Development. Has that all on their website if anyone's interested. And I don't remember what the next session topic is. I think it's zoning ordinance related. You can always sign up on the website there. And I would also just add that the legislative session has started in Concord, and I know short-term rentals are on their agenda. They had a hearing, I think, last week just to get things started. So we'll have to just see how that all plays out over the next few months, but they're looking at it again. So that's it. Does anyone have any public comment that is not related to the ADUs? No. It's a quiet group so far. I don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign. Go ahead, Kathy. The position has been like a wait and see what the state does. I think that's what we were advised by our town council to do, is because there's no real guidance from the state at this point. So I can tell you that our legal review of our current ordinance said that they are not allowed right now. But just saying. 7:28. Anybody's, there are handouts in the back. I can tell you that there are, I think, 5 or 6 different documents in the back. Our current zoning, the proposed changes. There's a couple of page ADU document from the state. There's the RSA itself, if you want to take a moment to get anything to reference.
Wonder if we should get that microphone off a little bit.
And okay. And
Just one page.
yeah, it's that front and back.
Just one page each.
Okay,
I think we're good. 7:30.
7:30? Okay. I'm going to open the hearing now. It is 7:30. And this hearing is to get public input on the proposed changes to the accessory dwelling unit zoning ordinance. That's section 7A and 7B. We also included the multiple dwellings zoning and a couple of definitions on the document just for points of reference. There are some minor changes and then the significant change on the lot acreage. I don't want to take too much time going over the details unless you all want me to, so that there's more time for public questions, but I'm happy to do that if you'd like. I would just say that I did get some questions and emails and phone calls over the last, I don't know, couple of weeks, just asking about what's going on and what this is all about. So I was just going to cover a few things in case some of you have the same questions. One is RSA 67471 says that towns must allow ADUs in all districts where single family homes are permitted. So that's in every district in Temple is a residential district where there are single family homes. How we do that, there's some flexibility, but we do have to allow it everywhere that there are single family homes permitted. Any proposed zoning changes always have to tie back to the master plan and the vision statement. And on our vision statement, it says that Temple residents should have a diversity of socioeconomic backgrounds and ages. Housing stock should be primarily owner occupied. Housing types and costs should vary, and that Temple should provide reasonable housing opportunities for low and moderate income residents. And that statement came out of townwide surveys and forums back in 2018, I believe, was when this went into effect. So these changes are intended to fulfill that desire that was expressed by residents to offer affordable housing options. And we felt like this was one that had a minimal impact on the community while staying true to the other desires expressed in the vision statement. So what's allowed now is one attached ADU, no more than 40% of the residents within or attached to the primary residence. Independent living facilities must be provided with provisions for sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation. State approval still applies for septic and water, off-street parking, an interior connecting door, which can be locked. This is all part of the state RSA, as well as the building and occupancy permits as would normally be required for any building. Same goes for the detached ADU, except that right now we require double the acreage. So in the village district, it would be 4 acres required. In the residential, 6 acres required, and in the mountain district, 10 acres. And the detached ADUs are no more than 67% of the primary residence. Everything else applies as well. We did ask for a legal review. One of the questions we had was, does this mean one accessory dwelling unit can be attached or detached? Or can somebody have one of each? Or is it just one or the other? And the legal review came back and said, while he felt that the language in our zoning could probably use some clarification, he felt that it meant one or the other, not both. And I believe that was the intention of the original zoning ordinance as well. We can talk more about the owner occupancy thing. That was something that was of concern, and it's something that we've proposed making a change to. Just would remind everyone that the select board is responsible for enforcement. We can set the zoning, but it is up to the select board to enforce any of these zoning requirements. Let's see, is there anything? There was also a question about, like, did this come out of the charrette? And the answer to that is no. They started talking about this before I was on the planning board, but since May or June, I think, was when Bruce and Brian brought this up again and said, can we look at this again? So we did some research, a lot of research since then. We looked at other towns, we looked at the RSA, we looked at a guide that's put out by the state, and just talked to other planning board members in other towns to see what's working and what's not working for them. So does anyone else want to add anything to that before we open it up to the I would just say that it is likely that we'll have a second hearing. So if you think of something after you walk out of here today, please do email us or call. I mean, there'll be another chance to speak. So if, you know, you read through this when you get home and something triggers a question, please feel free to follow up. So I'll open it to the floor, and I will just ask for people to use the microphone so that we can hear you and the folks at home can also hear. I'm not sure if you're getting up to speak, Nick, or John, would you like to? Yeah, can you use the microphone, please?
I appreciate the comment on the background and how many years you've been wrestling with this question. Very accurate. I do have some general comments, because there was no opportunity for public input on the proposal. My understanding is that we just prepared a couple weeks ago, maybe, and the last meeting of the planning board, the public was not allowed to speak. So this is sort of
I'm sorry, John. I think they're having trouble hearing. Could you make sure the microphone is on, please? Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes.
No,
much
good.
better.
Sorry about that. So this is the first opportunity the public has had to comment on this particular proposal. General comments, and I only have 3 or 4, but the state requires attached ADUs, and the max size can't be less than 750 square feet. So Temple is complying with that. Temple also allows, not required by the state, detached ADUs, different minimums, different maximums, which is confusing. And I think the opportunity to view the video from the last planning board meeting was very instructive, that there was a debate among members of the committee, the board, the planning board, as to what Temple's rules actually were on square footage. So this is an opportunity to perhaps to simplify that. But just as an example, if a residence is 3,000 square feet, make the math easy. Today, an attached ADU could be 1,200 square feet, 40%. And a detached ADU could actually be 2,000 square feet. So it could be a significant building. So Temple now complies with all state regulations relative to ADUs, and Temple goes beyond that to allow detached ADUs. The planning expert that the board had at the last meeting outlined that many towns don't allow detached ADUs, and many towns, I'm not sure if she said most, but many towns have much more straightforward rules on the square footage. They don't deal with all these percents. They just specify how many square feet, minimum, maximum, et cetera. So I'd also point out that there's a purposes section on Temple's zoning ordinance at the very beginning. And among the purposes are to prevent overcrowding of land, to provide opportunity for affordable housing, and to avoid undue concentration of populations. So I'd like to now make a couple of comments, first on attached ADUs, then I'll switch to detached ADUs. Currently, as Christine pointed out, at point of application, the owner must reside in the on the property. The change would require that the owner continuously or on an ongoing basis reside on the property. Temple has a hard time sort of overseeing its zoning now. We don't have a code enforcement officer. So there's a practical question as to, if we change it to the owner has to reside there, how would Temple ever administer it? The state does allow you to have a provision like that. I'd also point out that requiring the property owner to reside on the property sort of interferes or is inconsistent with the idea of affordable housing. If, for affordable housing, and I know it is a primary topic, then it would seem like we would want to do, the town would want to do not everything possible, but at least consider, as you're looking at different provisions, whether that would encourage or discourage affordable housing. And I would suggest that requiring the property owner to reside there would discourage investment in affordable housing. If we didn't allow, if we didn't require it, we'd have a higher probability of having people invest in affordable housing in our town. Currently, the minimum square feet footage is 400. The maximum is 40% of the combined area of the two units, but in order to comply with state statute, not less than 750 square feet. I've never understood the basis for the 40%, and the 40% is simpler than, I've forgotten the old rule, but it was even more complicated. When Carol was here at the last meeting, she commented that many towns use just square foot numbers, a minimum of 400, a maximum of, I think her example was either 800 or 850. Easy to remember, easy to apply, avoid the confusion that was evident when this board was discussing it at your last meeting. So one suggestion would be to consider something much simpler: min 400, max 800, 850, even 1,000, to get rid of the uncertainty and the confusion around this. The example I used, and I'm repeating myself a little bit, but 3,000 square foot dwelling, currently you could have an ADU, attached ADU of 1,200 feet. So something like 850 or 1,000 might be very, very workable. I'll next switch to the detached ADUs. The proposal is to delete the 2 times acreage requirement and open up detached ADUs to any size lot, whether it's 2 acres or 3 acres, or in the case of non-conforming lots, pick your number, a half an acre. Someone with under this proposal, someone with a half an acre could have 2 houses on that lot. And if one house is 3,000 square feet, my same example, you'd have a 2,000 square foot house and a 3,000 square foot house on for Temple, a relatively small lot. So I would suggest that that's not reasonable to allow that on, particularly on non-conforming lots, but also in the village. If you can just picture what our village would look like if we had sort of twice as many houses. And I know there was a statement about from the board about don't worry, this is never going to happen. People aren't going to build these things. Well, you know, I grew up in Nashua, and I had the opportunity to drive through the old neighborhood, and man, are they building on every square inch of land. So it might not happen here in my lifetime, but it's going to happen. So whatever we do has long-term implications. I'd also like to point out that the 67% today discriminates in favor of people with big houses. So if I've got a 3,000 square foot house, I can build a 2,000 square foot detached ADU. If I've got a 1,500 square foot house, I'm limited to 1,000 feet. So square feet. So why would we use a percentage and discriminate and confuse? Wouldn't it make more sense to have the same rule on size for a detached ADU as an attached ADU, something like minimum 400, maximum 1,000, so that there's the people with large houses aren't favored over people with smaller properties. I'd also like to point out that the way this is drafted, there's no residency requirement for detached ADUs. There's one under the draft, there's one for attached ADUs, but not detached. So what we'd be doing is for investors that want to come to town and take advantage of our ADU ordinance, they'd be encouraged to, buy a 3-acre lot and put up 2 ADUs, essentially 2 rental houses, rather than buy an existing property and create an apartment in that property, which they couldn't do if they had to reside there. There's a reference in the detached ADU statute now to not being allowed in PRDs. And that was, I'm sure, well thought out before my time. But I would point out that it doesn't say no detached ADUs in the Mountain District Conservation Development Ordinance. So I would think that it would be important to add that Mountain District reference to the PRD reference. So bottom line here, I believe this proposal is coming on the town too quickly. Carol Ogilvie mentioned that in her discussion with the board at the last meeting. The town had no input into this. There was no meeting of the planning board where this was, that I'm aware of, where this was discussed and the public was notified and invited to come in and talk about it. In the old days, we used to have forums. We used to sit in a couple of circles in this room and discuss things like this. So I would encourage the board to consider that. Thank you.
Go ahead, Nick.
Clay Leonard's, 19 Applewood Lane, right next door here. 2 general comments. First of all, my basic opinion is I think a homeowner ought to have wide latitude of what they do to their property for their house. So I support fundamentally what you're trying to do here. The other general statement is if Temple doesn't have an ordinance on rental property, they should, and this shouldn't be it, but it is. And the reason I say that is specifically, if you look at 7.30, the intent of this section is to allow homeowners to generate extra income. Really? Okay. Elderly to have caretakers or renters share a home. Not sure if that's supposed to be 2 thoughts or 1, but it's not even a cohesive thought. But you're talking about generating extra income and renters sharing a home. Based on the discussion you guys had a couple of weeks ago, it sure sounded like the intent of this was to create affordable housing for a family member, older, younger, whatever. It should say that. If you want to leave it ambiguous about rental, fine, but it should not be talking about rent. If you're going to have rental property, have a rental property ordinance. Don't backdoor it through this. The other thing, and I agree with John 100%, if you look at 7A25, the owner of record of the principal dwelling must reside in either the principal dwelling or the accessory dwelling unit. That's under 7A. That only refers to the attached unit. It does not refer to the detached units. That is completely unacceptable to have the detached units where somebody could sweep in, throw up 2 houses and bolt. That's rental property. That should be in a rental property order. It's not here. I really favor Wilton's wording where it's clear. And I'm a strong believer that ambiguity, contradiction is bad. clarification and redundancy is not. So the argument of that's redundant is bullshit. That's perfectly acceptable in this if it shows up in a couple places, as long as it's not contradictory. But if we don't want people to come in and do condos, have a house, throw a condo up, let's say it. Let's not dance around it. And again, if we're going to have a rental property ordinance, let's have that. Let's have it separate. Let's have it clean.
Go ahead, Alan.
Number of things. I tend to agree with a lot of what John Kiley said. So I'm not going to belabor a lot of that. And the change in 7A.10, adding the word within, to my mind implies that the accessory dwelling has to be within the existing dwelling's envelope. And I don't think that's the intent here, and it shouldn't be, because typically when you're adding an accessory dwelling, you need to add another entrance, possibly another stair, add a little room somewhere. So I really think that wording needs to be looked at carefully, because I don't think it worked. It's ambiguous. Again, we're running away from ambiguity here.
Alan, Alan, which section was that? 7A10, did you say? Which section?
7A.10.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
With adding the word within. The other thing, the previous speaker whose name I didn't catch, I think that you're skating on very thin legal ice when you differentiate between home ownership and rental property. I think you can't require housing to be owner occupied generally. I think you can perhaps within the accessory dwelling thing, but generally you can't say, oh, we only allow owner occupied housing. You're not allowed to rent it out. I'm not a lawyer, but it seems to me in my experience on this board that has come up a number of times. At the same point, I agree with John that I think requiring the owner, one of the units be owner occupied indefinitely is a bad plan. People die. On the other side of the library is several units that belong to the estate of Lillian Maynard. It's obviously not owner occupied. Both units are rented out as far as I know. I don't think anybody in the family is living there. And as John said, I think it's going to be an enforcement nightmare. And I think it's a mistake. I do believe that in the detached dwelling unit thing, it should be added that it be owner be occupied when the application is filed. I also agree with John's comment that we need to look carefully at the lot sizes for detached dwellings, even if we go down to 3 acres. But as he said, there are houses on non-conforming lots that are half an acre, some in the village, some spread out all over the place. And I think there needs to be a minimum lot size for a detached accessory dwelling. I think that's it.
Can I make one clarification? 7A10 currently says must be attached to and part of. It doesn't say within.
But we're proposing to add the word within.
Yeah, we were.
Yes.
That isn't in the document I've got here. 7A10 just says to be attached to and part of.
It was to replace 7A-70. I think he's done. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Gail Cromwell. I'd like to know what kind of problem we're trying to solve before I evaluate the solution. And I'm not real clear here on what we're trying to solve. I went back and listened carefully to what Carol Ogleby had to say. I've known Carol for a number of years in her work with the state, and I have great respect for her. She said pretty clearly, it's not so bad in this area. Not every town needs to do something. We already comply with the state law, and that ADUs are not the perfect solution to affordable housing because ADUs themselves turn out to be expensive. So what exactly are we trying to do here? If it's affordable housing, then I would like to know why you have settled on ADUs as the solution to the exclusion of possibly some other solutions. Bruce, I remember a couple of years ago when you had sketches of what are those houses where you have together?
Duplex.
Duplexes, that's it, that's the word. They weren't, people said, nah, we don't want that in Temple. They didn't like the way they looked, or for whatever reason. But maybe that is a different solution. Now, what I am troubled by is reducing the size of the lot down to accommodate this. I said to myself, okay, what's the worst thing that can happen? We have a 3-acre lot. We probably, let's say we have 500 of them in the town, which I think is probably not right. We probably have 400. Okay, everybody does it. So all of a sudden you've got an extra 400 houses and hopefully they're going to be cheap because otherwise you're not solving the affordable housing problem. They've got to be cheap houses. Okay, that's the worst case. The other extreme is that nobody cares. Nobody does anything. And in fact, that's what Carol went on to say in part of her remarks. She said she looked at Merrimack. Only a few people actually did something, so that this is not exactly the perfect solution. So I think you need to go back and think this through again. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? And is the ADU the way to go? That's what I ask you to do. I would like to say also that I admire what the planning board does. You're able to go through all of those regulations with subdivisions and this and that. You do a fine job. You don't have to do more, okay? You don't have to solve the problems of our town or the world or whatever it is. Stay with your job. That's what I would appreciate your doing. Thank you.
Go ahead, Rose.
Rose Lowry, Cutter Road. I will represent the problem we're solving because I have a little house, little beat up house on 2 acres of land. And if we had wanted to have our daughter live with us for a year so she could save money, we couldn't do it because we couldn't bring in a tiny house for her. There wasn't a way for us to expand our house. She really wanted something that was a little more detached, and 2 acres is not very much, but she also didn't want a big separate apartment or anything. She just wanted something kind of separate. But this was where I was really thinking about this and how there's not a way for me to make extra income from my property and have a tiny house that could be in the back. It's pretty back there. It's only 2 acres, but it's real pretty. And I think someone would love to be able to come and visit there. And I know, it's a can of worms about whether we allow Airbnb in your ADU, stuff like that. But that's the problem we're solving here, is for people who have little lots, didn't have a lot of money to buy a 10-acre lot. They bought a little lot, but they still need help making money. And this is a way we're moving towards being able to allow people to do that. And so I think this is a good step forward. It's a good discussion about how to do it. So I just want to put that out there, just on a very personal note, why this is something useful for the residents of Temple. It doesn't just serve the people with huge lot. It serves who needs it most, which is the people who could only afford a little lot and maybe need a little more. And I did want to reiterate a couple of things that within wording on 7A10, that is, to me right away said, what do you mean within that? You can't bump it out a little bit. So that was a weird one. And then also the residing in the property. If you decide, if we retired and decided to go to Florida and we had an ADU, does that mean it could no longer be used as an ADU? So there's some ambiguity about there that could be cleared up. And this is another little question. It's not really on discussion, but I just want to get it down on the record about manufactured housing. And again, I'm thinking tiny houses. A tiny house is actually technically, I believe, manufactured housing because it's on a chassis. It's, just like a mobile home. It's a mobile home. So I'm hoping at some point that will get addressed and looked at is there some other way to make that not so blanket of disallowing a certain kind of housing? Because, manufactured housing solves an awful lot of problems for an awful lot of people at the lower end of the spectrum. And I think we want to be pretty diverse here in Temple and allow small families who aren't rich to start here, get more people to come here. So we have more kids in our school and all that stuff. And that starts by making it open to a more diverse income level. Thank you.
Lillian LaBelle. I want to address the issue of reducing the required property size for an ADU. I think 3 acres is a minimum size. One of the things that came out of the master plan, I believe, and the charrette also, is that people said they wanted to retain the rural character of the town. They also said they don't want any changes. And I realized that with this state requirement or possible requirement, that we may not have much of a say in that. But I don't think that we should allow people to be able to build a large second home on a small acre or a small acreage, because that will change the character of the town very quickly. For instance, if I wanted to build a house on my property, I could put it between my house and the inn. And how would that change the rural character of the center of town? We don't want, part of the planning board's job is not only planning around specific issues, but you have to be strategically inclined. You have to have that vision of what will happen to the town in 10 years or 20 years. If we allowed building on small acreage, we could see ourselves in 10 years looking like Milford. And in 20 years, starting to look like Nashua. And to the point that was made earlier, I remember moving back to New Hampshire 30 years ago when 101 in Nashua was all farms. And that is not the case. It happens quickly. Developers swoop in and they change an area very, very quickly. So this is an important consideration to make. Please do what people in Temple want, which is to keep the rural character. Thank you.
Mind if I take this with me? I just hate public speaking anyway, much less standing up.
Just don't take it home with you.
No, don't worry. So I think I'm going to repeat a little bit of what's already been said, but for sure, I think it was clear that Carol Ogilvy was surprised that you were going to attempt to do it, make this change this year. She said after you had a discussion of timing, technically you could make it, I guess. It depends politically on how much time you want to offer the town to review and comment. You know, one or short meetings with no forums. And you can see there are a lot of questions, solutions to what you could do to make it better. And you will barely have time to do that with any thought. And it was pretty clear at that meeting too, that there was a lot of confusion amongst yourself on percentages. And again, multiple times she very politely kept saying, make it simple, just use a square footage. If you don't use a number like 1,000 square foot, my understanding is of today, if you lived in a 3,000 square foot house, it would be possible to build a 4,000 square foot house and call that the house the primary. And the house you lived in would then become the ADU. Numbers would still work. So you are encouraging people to build larger houses on their lots. I mean, I just, it's simpler and clearer to people what the number is, and they know what they're buying into. I mean, I think that's about all. I mean, I just go back to, I think the town deserves the chance to weigh in on this more than at just one meeting. I don't know how many people were actually aware of this going on tonight. And there's just, it's a complicated issue and you need to take the time to think it through. I mean, I'm aware that Brian, who's not even here, came up with it 3 weeks ago.
It was in the spring.
No, he gave you asked him for his wording. It was 3 or 4 weeks ago that he gave you, I just want to take out the 3 acres.
Right.
So that's when it was decided. There was virtually no discussion on that until Carol Ogilvy came. That's not healthy.
Anyone else in the audience? Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Nate Sartell. I live on Kendall Road. And I grew up in Temple and I recently moved back. And one of the reasons that I really like this town is because it does still have some open space. And so I guess I'm just sharing that, right, from the perspective of that's some of where my comments are coming from, right? And so when I look at these sorts of things, the way I do it, I made a list of the pros and cons. I think that we should always be able to acknowledge that if we make a change, it does have pros and it does have cons. And it's really, where does that fall in the balance? And are we ready to make a change, right? And so I'll just quickly run through them just because, but you know, I think for the pros, I think this does endorse property rights for people, right? I think that's something a lot of people in town value. I think this would promote more housing. And I think it does provide options for income and age in place. So I think those are pros. On the con side, I'm, like others have mentioned, unclear who really is the need or is asking for this, and what is the actual like problem that we're solving. I'm still a little unclear on that. I feel it's affordable housing, I think is maybe the main one. But that leads me to other questions, which is like, what is affordable housing for Temple? And is this that? And I want that discussion to happen. And at the charrette, I actually thought that was going to be the discussion, and there was literally none. And that was disappointing to me, because I think that that's something that we could talk about, and there may be options, and they may be things that we aren't even, to me, they're not even on the page. Like, these are smaller things. These are easy to move things. These are affordable things. An ADU is not affordable. I think if we make this change, honestly, probably a lot of the people probably aren't even going to build anything because it's expensive. But I think another con to this is that it would, you know, I sort of said it's hard to build, but it does promote building. It makes it more likely that things will get built. And I think in a long term, you know, if I'm lucky, I'll be here in 50 years and see the impacts of these changes, right? And I've lived in places where the houses are on top of each other, and I left those places, and they have constant pressure. I left my last house, the people came in, they doubled the square footage, they built a huge garage. a lot that I didn't think was even buildable on next door now has a huge house on it, right? These things just happen. And I worry about that and whether we're promoting that and whether we need to at this stage. I also think there's one of the nice things about the 3 acre or having a minimum, right? People say, oh, it's nice on the edge of my property. And that's because there's not someone else built up next to it. And so I worry about the detached ADUs taking up that space, as opposed to anyone can make an attached ADU now. And that's not in that space. You know, it's not so nice out back on your property when there's another house on the border. And I also think that the owner occupancy thing is really confusing, and whether that's enforceable and what the implications of that are, I don't have my head wrapped around. I don't see Temple enforcing it. I honestly don't know that we want to enforce that, but it sort of puts us in a precarious spot where maybe we feel like we need to, and then we're selectively doing it. And that just seems like a problem. I feel like we're doing this before we know what problem we're solving. It feels hasty. I'm concerned. What is affordable? If we're trying to solve affordable housing, let's talk about that and let's agree or have a consensus with what that is, and then let's make moves towards that. I'm concerned that this isn't really doing that, or that there's risks to making this change in the long term, that, and it may not even actually solve the need or the desire. So again, these are just kind of some of my concerns in the con side. So I just don't feel like we're ready to make this change. I'm not even sure that it's a good or a bad change necessarily. I don't like it, but I'm not sure that it's good or bad. But I really feel like we're not ready to make this change, and it's permanent. This won't get undone. You change this acreage, it's not ever going to be changed back. Like, that's not how the world works. Like, so I'm really cautious and would caution us about making this change. Thank you.
All right, first of all, I just want to say thank you.
Just introduce yourself. Sorry.
Sorry. Nicole Concordia, Shooters Hill Lane.
Thank you.
I just want to thank the board for addressing this issue. I know that I've been paying attention to this issue for the last 5 years, and there have been a lot of discussions with this board, with previous boards, before I was even on the board. If you pay attention to the state understands that there is a shortage of housing in the state. And yes, it's primarily in the affordable range is what we're looking at, but we also have one of the oldest aged populations in the country. And we have to be also concerned about people being able to age in place, being able to stay in their home, being able to convert their homes or make space for people to come in, as was mentioned here earlier, as caretakers or having a family member be able to come in into that space. So I think what the board is proposing here with some minor adjustments is really good for the town, for a lot of different types of people. And I think it's a really small incremental step that will help alleviate some of the pressure, but won't be the magic bullet that fills the need and fixes everything. So I think what you guys are doing is on the right track. And I want to thank you for that. I think in 7.30, it says right there's a couple questions earlier in the discussion about, whether you can have an attached and a detached. It says right there, one accessory dwelling unit may be attached or detached. So that seems pretty clear cut to me, that you can have one or the other, but you can't have both. So you have to make that decision. In 7A10, my understanding was you were trying to replace 7A70 language, right?
7A70, yes.
Right. So in 7A10, I think that it would just be clearer if it says must be attached to or within instead of the comma within. I think then that brings up what was in 7A70 up into that section in the same manner. Okay. I did have a question around requiring owner occupancy, because I know back, what year was that? 2019, 2020, when we looked at the condominiums, or sorry, not the condominiums, when we looked at doing the duplexes, we got feedback at that time from Bill Drescher that said we couldn't require what the ownership was. Oh, I think we couldn't require owner occupancy. Is that right, Alan?
I think it was, yeah, because I think what we were looking at was possibly requiring one of the units to be owner occupied. And he said you can't do that.
So I don't know if you guys got legal review. I've seen some flashes up here of legal review, but I looked for that document in the back and it wasn't there. So I don't know what sort of legal review you've had and what the feedback was, but I would just say to check on that.
Our
that
town
one.
attorney looked at it, but I think that was before the. So they have not responded to me since the latest version.
Okay, so I would just highlight that as something to keep your eye on.
Which is why we anticipate a second.
I'd also like to just throw my 2 cents in about the minimum 400 square feet. The culture is changing. There are a lot of people who want tiny homes. They want to live in small dwellings and they don't want to deal with the maintenance. They don't want to deal with all this stuff. So I don't really see a need to have a minimum square footage here. If someone wants to live in a 350 square foot space, more power to them, right? My first apartment with my husband and my cat was 650 square feet. And I'm really surprised that the three of us made it out alive. But there are some people who might enjoy that and we should let them enjoy their life and their property the way they want to do it. So that would just be my suggestion, is getting rid of the minimum unless there's a really good reason to keep it. I do also have some concerns about the blanket removal in 7B10. About just everywhere, it's a right. I think it would make more sense to put just a little bit of a cap on it and add language at the end, something along the lines of, so long as the lot is conforming to current zoning standards. So if you have a non-conforming lot, you don't automatically have a right to stick a second building on there. And I just saw this today, and I know I mentioned it to Christine, but 7B90, I believe violates the law right now. We had to change 7A90 a couple years ago. And so I think while you're making these changes, you could very easily update the language in 7B90. So
yeah,
that is all. Thank you.
Just to clarify, we have this Appendix C from the ADU law explained. And it says the municipality may require owner occupancy of one of the units. If it does this, the municipality should consider what it means by owner. Does the owner need to be a physical person, or can it be a member of an LLC that owns the property, a beneficiary of a revocable trust that owns the property, or a person with an interest in another legal entity like a partnership or corporation that owns the property? Residency of the owner may also be required and could be demonstrated through voter registration, automobile registration, or similar indicators of domicile.
Okay, so it looks like you can do it, and I'll just say I don't support that. So, thank you.
It's well, Kathy hasn't gone yet. Go ahead, Kathy. Well, let people have their first go around first before we open it up.
Hi, Kathy Boot. On the ADUs, I only have a couple things about those, and I think having something that is compatible with the building itself and not have it just totally different, that it's aesthetically compatible, is sort of important to me. I think they all should be done by special exception. I think we need that fail safe of having more questions asked before they're allowed to do this. Detached, the dados. I was disappointed that the town allowed it. I was hoping we weren't going to be the town that everybody looked at to see what the pitfalls were, how we got sued or, anyway, I just wish we had not accepted the detached because we didn't have to. The auxiliary, we had to, that's the law. On the detached, I'd like to see on there that they have their own designated address, that there's no additional curb cuts for a detached. And that they too were common in the design. And I have a hypothetical question. A property owner has, let's say, 10 acres. He wants to put a detached in. And because of the situations and the challenges of the land, he has to put it far away from the main building. At some point, he wants to sell this property, wants to cut it in half. That detached unit now encroaches upon the acreage that he wants to subdivide. What does he do then? It's now, it's a detached unit. How does he subdivide off if he has put that detached unit over onto a piece of land that he thought was going to be okay? I just think that's something to be thought about. And I think the detached unit should also, I have so many notes. I know I loaded you guys up with them the other day. I don't know where I put that. Both the dwelling units must be in common ownership and never to come off of that. And so he's got that unit over there. That's common ownership. Is that a lawsuit? Is that going to be a lawsuit for us? We don't know. I'd just like to know how that would be handled. And again, special exception from the ZBA for approval on these. I think that was pretty much it. I think that was it. Oh, wait a minute. Residential area. One of my questions was, let's say somebody has a nice little ranch and they've got a business there that they got a special exception for. And let's say it's to repair cars. Their property is zoned RA, but they're a special exception. So are they allowed to put on a detached unit? Are they allowed to put on an accessory unit? Does that change for them because it's a business by special exception?
It is my understanding that it does not change. That
It
they
does
still,
not
they can
change.
still have,
So businesses can have,
they could have an ADU if they have a residence there.
yeah, and a detached or a detached.
Yeah, right now, yes.
Yeah,
If they have double the acreage right now.
yeah. Okay. All right, I think that was all my questions, but I just think that everything should be done through special exception and not just, sign the paper, that kind of thing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Does anyone else who hasn't spoken yet want to speak? Okay, Connie, did you want to speak again?
I just want to make it clear that we do allow ADUs. We do allow detached ADUs, except in the PRD district.
Right.
So the people in the PRD district are not going to be affected by this, but everybody else will with their neighbors, or maybe. this aging in place thing, I mean, seems, if you're aging in place and, you make a bedroom or something for somebody in your house, I think to help aging in place, the problem is, they have to sell their house and move to a home that helps the elderly. I mean, I don't think there are many people that have to resolve their aging in place problems by staying at home. And if they have a home in Temple, they can probably sell it for a lot of money and go where they need to be to get the help they need to take care of. The people I know that are having trouble it's not, they don't want somebody living with them, probably can't afford to have somebody living with them. And, it's a matter of they have to seek help elsewhere. The only other comment I'd like to make is the legal review comment that you posted last time. And so you requested from town council the review, and the comment was the permitted uses in the district seems to be on one family year-round dwellings. So that's what we basically have now in Temple. And the change that you're suggesting now makes every lot in essence permitted for 2 separate year-round dwellings for potentially multiple people and families. Her opinion is
It was
she's
actually Joe Driscoll, not Laura.
okay. He thinks this sounds like a potential conflict. And that was clearly kind of dismissed to the point you even asked Carol Ogilvy, who I don't think is a lawyer, what she thought of it. I mean, I go back to, I just think this board requests that they take more time to review this. There are some good, I don't have any problem with having ADUs in town. Detached ADUs, I think, on 6 acres, probably not a problem. On 3 acres, I mean, I'm just glad I don't live in a congested area and feel sorry for those residents in Temple that do.
Is there anyone? Go ahead, Rose. Sure.
Rose Lowry, Cutter Road. I really like what Kathy said about special exception, and I don't know if there's a way that the board could include board review of, because I would really hate for us to have that 3 acre again, because I'm on 2 acres. There's a bunch of us who have weird 2 acre lots, and it just seems weird that we would be excluded from being allowed to have an ADU. But if there was a board review that just kind of made sure that it wasn't like right in front of the windows of my neighbor or, some other strange placement, I think that might be a nice way to make sure that whatever is proposed is going with the nature of the neighborhood and what the town wants. Okay, that was it.
Do you want to comment on that? The building permit? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Nicole.
Just clarification for the room here. The legal review that Connie was just talking about as far as the potential conflict, that exists in our current zoning right now, right? So nothing that we're discussing here tonight makes it more out of alignment.
True.
Thank you.
I'd like to address Bickman's questioning the word within. I also questioned that, but I found out that I think Christine was just trying to get it in line with what the state RSA says. That word is in the state's RSAs. As far as John Kylie is worried about investors coming in and buying up a lot of property and then putting up a whole bunch of houses and selling them. Well, if these houses have to be owner occupied, they're putting in a lot of big houses.
Go ahead, John.
We definitely don't want to be like Peterborough, John.
We agree on that, George. Thank you. I'd like to just pick up very quickly on George's comment on investors and owner occupied. The proposal now that we're discussing tonight does not require owner occupancy for detached ADUs. It's just attached. So if we want the protection of owner occupancy, we should consider expanding it to both. Thank you.
I agree.
Go ahead.
I guess I like the owner occupancy thing, but I really feel like it's not enforceable. It's there, but we're not enforcing it now. And why would we start enforcing it except at the time of build? I think when someone would build something, it would be clear and the permit would be denied if they were not the owner occupant, but we're not actually doing that. And I just think we just need to be aware of that, right? We could put the rule in there, but it's not going to change that someone might buy it and invest there. I don't happen to think that that's going to be a immediate short-term problem, but I do just want to clarify that my view of it is that it's not enforceable.
There are towns that fine you if, yeah, and the fine is pretty substantial too.
Sean Radcliffe, I am on the ConCom. I've been thinking about water when you're potentially doubling the houses on a given amount of land. And what's being shown on the screen talks about it. From what I take, this is saying applicant must show adequate water supply according to the state. Is that what that's saying?
Yes, there's the state the state regulates that. The town does not.
Do they specify what that means though? Like, is it how high or low of a bar? Because this last summer, it was another drought. My neighbor and I, if we both use water we normally would, we would run our wells dry. So we know we can't do that. So I'm just curious how that adequate is actually defined. You could easily have a major problem once you say, well, they all met the adequate supply, but it's really not what houses use.
Sure. So I had an earlier version that had the actual language from the RSA, and we opted to go with just citing the RSA. But we can be more specific, but I think there's a lot more to it than just what's in the RSA, but it's regulated by the state. It's not.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
It could be an area where it could be a problem if that adequate is not, is easy to pass. That's.
Yeah, it's not an easy pass.
Okay.
For that or septic. I don't think I have that copy. Trying to cut down on my paper lugging. It was on the one that we had at the last meeting, when I showed the different examples from different towns. Go ahead. While we're trying to find that.
Good evening. I can't stand on my tiptoes. Just a few comments. A lot of folks have spoken about this ordinance already this evening, and I want to thank the board for their work bringing this forward so that we could have this opportunity to talk about the Temple zoning ordinance, which is always a work in progress. And it seems like every time we make an adjustment, we find 7 more. Not uncommon. But I think one of the things that's key to the ADU concept is that the accessory dwelling unit remains somewhat subordinate to the primary residential structure. And I am not certain if we're really accomplishing that with the ordinance as it exists today. I think, having read a couple times and having had a little experience in this area, the description of how you figure out how big or small you can be without any effort, I came up with a couple of scenarios where I was like, wow, you could buy, the basement counts, you build a house, have a house with a basement, you build a house on a slab, the next thing you know, your houses are, no one is really subordinate to each other. But regardless, I think if the board wishes to consider this portion of the ordinance and consider making changes, we should look for an opportunity to make it better. And I think there's several opportunities here. One opportunity I think would be to make some clarity around the minimum and maximum provisions. And I also really think consider aligning them so that they are standard. The town of Temple is a small town, and administering a diverse set of regulations is challenging. So I think that's one place where the town could have an opportunity for an easy win to make moving forward simpler. I think about some of the descriptions here. The full area of a usable basement may be included. I assume usable basement means a basement maybe I can stand up in, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe it means one that is dry versus one that might flood every time we have the rains like we're having tonight. So I see a couple of opportunities in those sections. I'm not opposed in principle to the concept of a detached accessory dwelling unit, which is not required to be included in our ordinance by state law. But I think some real thought needs to go into how that's done, because what might feel like a great detached accessory dwelling unit to my neighbor could feel like something sitting 35 feet from my property line, which my house sits 35 feet from. And that, might not meet the intent of what the planning board is trying to achieve, which is provide additional housing without creating adverse impacts on existing housing. So I'd urge some serious consideration on the detached. There's a couple of places I might suggest some clarity, because I think that while it is clear eventually you can only have a detached or an attached, it's clear eventually. And I think there's some language adjustments that could make sure that that's clear in the first instance. I also think that regardless of whether the town can or cannot legally deal with this ownership issue, we have to be realistic. The town will not and cannot deal with policing who's living where, when, how, and why. It's hard enough sometimes to do that around the subtopic of motor vehicle registrations and whether someone actually lives in that house, or did they move to Florida and now they're just kind of like, pretending. So I would urge the board to only consider biting off something that we know the town can handle on the subject of owner occupancy. Just checking my notes. I did make a couple notes that I thought might help clarify, and I'm happy to share them and send them to the board on the language. I'm not opposed to many of the concepts, but I'm not certain this is quite ready for prime time, I guess would be my conclusion. Thank you.
Anyone else in the audience want to speak? No. Okay, well, I can close the hearing portion and turn it to the board for your thoughts, comments, questions. And I'd like to hear from everyone if possible. I don't want to pick on you, George, if you're not ready, but I always start in that direction.
One of the other things I wanted to address was in the area of having a detached unit far away from the main house. If the owner decided to subdivide that land, they would still have to meet the frontage requirements on a Class 5 highway. So if they had 600 feet on a Class 5 highway and they had the detached unit far away, they would have to subdivide that it met all the other zoning requirements.
George, did you want to comment at all on the building permit application process? Because that's something the select board handles versus the planning board. So if you got an application for an ADU, can you walk us through the process?
Well,
Building permit?
they'd have to go through a building permit,
Right, right.
and we have to have the Pete Castle handle the septic, and we have to have Willie Wilds handle the building permit.
Right, but you look at the zoning ordinance and make sure that where they're putting their house is
Of course,
appropriate,
right.
it meets the requirements.
I think it's in a, they're talking about, Kathy mentioned having building a nice cape, but then having like a shed roof on one end or something like, for the detached. I think that would be in the owner's interest to make sure that the ADU corresponded in likeness to the main house.
Mhm.
I think that makes it more saleable.
Mhm. Okay. Russ, did you want to comment or anyone? I should ask if there's follow-up questions as well for any members of the audience.
A couple things, I kind of like the idea of the special exception. It just gives sort of another view in that we've heard some comments about, well, what if this was right on my 35-foot setback and I can see it, versus maybe on this particular lot, it's fine. It would have it wouldn't be obnoxious. Nobody would see it, or maybe it would, a detached ADU, it might actually lend some attractiveness. I mean, there's plenty of residences in this town that have lots of outbuildings, barns, sheds, sugar houses, in all kinds of states of repair. And we don't worry about that. Yet somebody puts in maybe a nice detached ADU that looks very smaller compared to the house that's there, but it looks in kind. It looks like, oh, wow, it's like a little cottage at the back of this nice house, and it kind of looks the same way. I think that's what we're trying to talk about. And I think we heard some comments about the aging in place. And some people, that's not a concern. Some people, maybe they have enough money that they don't have to worry about where they go, or they go to a home that's $580,000 to get in, and then all the rest of the money for the rest of their life is gone. Some people don't have that. My dad has to go someplace. He's probably going to come and live at my house. And we have enough bedrooms. He could live there, and I get along with my dad. But there are certainly lots of people that like to have a bit of independence, and maybe they want to come, their wife or their husband have died, and they have a kid that has a house. Maybe they want to have a little independence, their own stove, make their own meals. I think that's what we're looking at. And that's aging in place. That's not to say that, go off, we're going to just stick you in a home now because we don't want to deal with you. That's just not community. So I think that's what some of these ADUs and detached ADUs are intending. The last thing I was thinking about is the 3 acres versus the 2 times the lot size. It really doesn't make a difference. It's the density on the land. Whether you have 2 families living in one house or 2 families living in a bigger house and a little house separated by 30 feet, it doesn't make a difference. It's the same amount of people on the property, and it's the same amount of septic system use, the same amount of well use. The state regulates all of that. And there's so many, I design septic systems, and there's so many regulations that you have to go through to design just one septic system on a lot. To put another one on it, it just multiplies. So it's taken care of. There's all kinds of setbacks. There's all kinds of restrictions. Once you have 2 septic systems on a lot, there's more restrictions. So it's not just like people are going to build wherever they want and put a septic system wherever they want and drain your well. It all has multiple levels of review. So I don't think whether you have it 3 acres or 6 acres it's not significant. You're just eliminating the option of some people who have smaller lots from being able to have an ADU. That's all I've got.
Sure. Well, it would be nice if we could solve the problem of affordable housing or just housing in general quickly, but that's not going to happen. The state's struggling with it. It's a national problem, but a state problem. And I think our intent was to try to do something. Whether it's right or wrong, I guess that remains to be seen. But I've been listening, and there's a lot of good points that you've all made, and I've taken a lot of notes. And, you know, for me, I guess I look at it like, Alan, we adopted this 20 years ago, 15. I thought the original was to the accessory, I thought.
I think the state was 2017, but.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't think we've had anybody come forward with a building permit for one, is what my point was. So, yeah, yeah. Mhm.
When I first came on the board, in 1986, large dwellings at the time, existing at the time of the adoption of zoning, could add as much as 2 accessory dwellings. I didn't call them accessory dwellings, but so under that, for instance, the Perry's, which used to be the West, they had 2 apartments in that. So I think there's always been something to allow accessory dwellings in one shape or another. But this was really driven by the change in the state law, which basically said everybody's allowed by right to have an attached accessory dwelling. Right. And then, but the towns were allowed to put various requirements in terms of size and ownership and so on. So it was, and if the town didn't do anything, then there was no limits. Anybody could build an accessory dwelling that was twice the size of their original house.
That's right.
And we, so that's why the board reacted and adopted this. And I certainly wouldn't say it's perfect, but it was that. But we've always had something. Recall we had in between.
Yeah. And then we adopted the town voted to adopt the detached accessory.
That was part of the same.
At the same time. So that, I guess my point is that there hasn't been, I don't think we've had any applications, building permit applications for detached. I think we might have had some for attached, but I don't think we've had any for detached. But I've been listening, so I've been hearing some things. I think that taking into consideration pre-existing lots, and I feel for you, Rose, but it is something that, you know, maybe we don't allow you know, pre-existing 1 and 2 acre lot buildings, but they have a way to get it through a variance. So you know, so everybody can be satisfied, possibly. I had a lot more I was going to say, but it was apparent to me after I've listened to everybody speak. I know there's only 18 of you here, the loud minority. But
1 or 2 online.
It's a shame. It's a shame we can't get more input. It's always the same people, but maybe you guys are the only ones that care. It's always the same people. It would be nice to have, in a town our size, to have a better representation and hear more voices. But I did hear everything you all had to say. I respect you all. And I'm going to chew on this. I feel as a board, we should move forward to the second hearing, but in no way does that mean that I feel like we should put it on the ballot, because we have time. So as in the same respect, we don't have to rush this. but we don't have to kill it tonight either. That's just my take. I'm one member. I think right now you've covered so much of it with the vision statement and a lot of it will just be repetition.
Mhm.
I had everything, I had all this prepared to read to you, but I'm not going to bore you with it. And so I think I'll listen to the rest of the members.
Yeah, thank you for the input. I did learn a lot by listening, and a couple things I took away was the suggestion, if it's legally allowed, to allow ADUs or detached ADUs, depending on where that line draws, by special exemption only, if that's something that's allowed. That gives that level of review, especially from an abutter point of view of where things might be located, that might help satisfy things. The con of that is it increases bureaucracy and the cost to the applicant to do so. So that's, pros and cons of that. I'm sorry. Try to get closer. Is that better? Yeah. All right. On the percent of square footage, I think there were a couple examples of how that could almost be turned around in ways that maybe the town wouldn't like. And an example, I think the example used is if someone has, I'll use different numbers, but someone has a 2,000 square foot house, decides, okay, that's going to be my ADU, and I'm going to build a 3,000 or 4,000 square foot house next to it as my primary. That might be currently allowed by our current zoning. If so, I think the board may want to revisit that language just to make sure it's within the intent of what we're trying to do. And there are a lot of good comments on residency requirements. I think the intent is, generally these are owner occupied, but I do agree it's hard to enforce. And I'd like to, talk to the board more about how that, and to the select board about what their thoughts on enforcing it if that stays within our zoning regulations. Because an unenforceable regulation is really not there. And those are the big takeaways I had, along with water quality and making sure that the state rules for septic and water do apply, and they do apply through reference to the RSAs, both in the current and future changes.
Okay, can anyone hear me well? Okay. So yes, also thanks for your input and your comments and your perspectives on things. And yes, this is not the magic solution to everything in this problems of this world. And it also isn't a magic solution. You mentioned how when you guys came to Temple, it was like X. Well, the world population has increased dramatically in that time period of your lives. The economic situations of the working and middle class have changed drastically from when, I don't want to be like, I'm the only person under 30 in here. I'm the only person under 30 in here. We are facing a different world from people of my generation and younger. We need to adapt to that. Family is going to go back to more multi-generational livings on the same property. And the fact of the stay-at-home thing, the house, an ancestor might have been the only person in their lineage that was ever able to afford a house in, say, a town like Temple. So if they could age in home and have family, stay on a place and not kill each other living together, their kids could end up with that property and their grandkids could end up with that property. But because upward mobility in a lot of ways is no longer existent, especially tell me a job in Temple where you can afford a property in Temple. And that's about all I have to say.
I've only been a resident in Temple for about 6 years now, but one of the reasons for buying the house was it had what was called an in-law apartment, and this had been assessed by Avatar. And the reason we bought the house was because one of the reasons was it had that, because we now have an in-law living with us, and it would have been a nightmare if he wasn't able to have his own separate apartment. So I think people overlook the fact that in the aging population, it might not be you directly, but you might have to look after a family member who would appreciate being able to live with them too. And that, I believe, is very important in this day and age on that. I do agree about the special exception on there. I think that's an excellent way to have control. I also agree with Bruce, is there's no intent to rush this through in any way, shape or form. What we're finding is, as we're looking at decreasing the double acreage, we find there are issues with the current form as it stands. So this forum and other forums are here to do exactly what you people are doing, is actually bring those issues to the forefront. And lots of notes are being taken here. And the full intention is to try and make this a workable solution. As regards the residency, it's better to have a rule to say that the residency should be there rather than having it not at all. Because we do have the select board looking for a code enforcement officer, whether it be full-time or part-time. That would be a way of actually trying to control that type of thing. So you can't just say that, you know, there's no, it wouldn't be monitored. There is a possibility it could be monitored in the future, and that is being looked at by another committee. I think that was about it for me.
Formal process.
I think we're in it right now.
Okay,
We're-
so this is hearing one, and then what happens after that?
Well, we haven't decided yet. We'll have to talk about it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Just-
Yeah, sure. So I just wanted to share a few of my takeaways. I also thought the comments about non-conforming lots and perhaps a special exception or variance for those is going to be important. I think I said this at the last meeting too, is I'm not convinced that the way our square footage, that formula is really confusing. There's got to be a simpler way to do that. So the idea of the maximum square footage, kind of initially open to that, but I could also see where that could be problematic. Yeah, more conversations, obviously, I think are important. Yeah, I think I don't want to copy what everyone else said or repeat what everyone else said. But I do think there is a problem. And I would just say that we have had residents who have wanted to do detached ADUs because they have a family member who wants to have some sort of independence, but live close to family, and they've not been able to do it. So is that a lot of people? No, certainly not, because it's expensive. But if they have land, it takes a big chunk out of the cost right off the bat. So there are situations, and I think, you know, I was in this situation with my own mother, who's now in a nursing home, which is not that easy to get into. I don't know if anyone else has been in this situation, but there's staffing shortages, so they're not necessarily taking new patients in some of the nursing homes. And it's expensive. I mean, yeah, I also have a brother who was the primary caretaker for his son, and they got divorced, and now they're on single incomes, and they have a hard time finding a place to live in the same school district, so that they can't share custody if they're not in the same school district. So I think these are very real world problems, and, you know, without going, it feels to me like it is a very small, it would have a minimal impact in Temple. But if it means it's going to get somebody who's living in their car off the street, it feels to me better than doing nothing. Maybe that's an extreme situation, but it is very real in our Condell school district that's happening. So if it means the family member can take somebody in, you know, maybe that's having a small impact. But again, I think this was a really productive conversation. I hope you all feel the same way. I've also taken a lot of notes. And I guess I would just ask the board how you would like to proceed at this point.
Yeah, I actually would, I wanted to answer a few questions too.
Sure.
If I could. So the question about aging in place. There is one instance in town, actually Priscilla Weston did age in place, or well, she, for a while. Yeah. Right. So there is examples of it, but not many, but there is. And then Kathy had asked the question about, and George tried to answer it. I don't know about if somebody had a 10-acre lot. You said, hypothetically, if they had a 10-acre lot, had an existing house, built another, a detached. Yes, they could subdivide that because they would have the acreage. You only need 3 acres, but they would have to meet all the other requirements. So they would have to have, their own driveway. And they would end up having to have their own septic, their own well. They'd have to be 35 feet off the setback line. They'd have to meet all our subdivision regulations, but they most likely would be able to. Yes, somebody could, but I don't know if anybody would do that, but they could. Yes, to answer that question. And I think you had another question, or maybe it was already answered about the village district. Would this apply to the village district? That's a John brought it up. It's a great question. We're talking really condensed small area. Maybe we should consider that almost like the non-conforming lots. But right now it's allowed. ADUs are allowed in any district, except for PRDs in Temple. And then you had asked about if an ADU and a detached ADU could be on the same, one on each same property. And the answer we told you was no on that one. I'm just trying to, because I knew you had sent questions. There can only be one owner. You cannot, it's not, can't be like a condominium. There can only be one owner of the two. If it was detached, there can only be one owner of the two buildings. Only if that person subdivided and met all the requirements with the acreage and frontage and everything else. Yeah, but one owner. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Right. Right. And then I guess the other thing is, and so that was pretty, I just want to answer your questions and address a couple other comments and questions. But the other thing was, so the house next door, which was the Lillian Maynard estate, now Bob Treadwell, who lives here in town, owns that. And he rents that. There's actually 2 apartments in the garage and 1 in the house. So that's a 3-unit. That right there. Yeah. Then Birch. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess I don't know if that, but like I'm bringing it up like grandfathering. How do we? The Birchwood Inn, Matt and Amy live down on Cutter Road, but there's 3 apartments in the Birchwood Inn. The gentleman that owned the brick school, and I know that was done through the ZBA. It's a little bit different of a situation, but there's 3 units there and they do not live in Temple. So we have set a precedent in town and there's a lot more of them. Those are just right here. You can see from right here. So it is a slope is a slippery slope. This whole owner occupy thing. For myself, I'm in favor of it, I think, for a lot of reasons, but we, how do you selectively, you said it best, Nate, we're going to start selectively enforcing. That's lawsuits waiting to happen. So there's a lot to this. There's a lot to it. But anyway, I'm not looking for an argument. I'm just stating how I feel and some facts and just want to answer a few questions. But that's all I have.
So how does do you want to comment, Alan?
Yeah, I just wanted to, a couple of people mentioned special exceptions. And so I'm speaking as a ZBA member. And if you require a special exception, there have to be a list of specific criteria that the ZBA has to look at that's within the ordinance. Just as we currently do for commercial.
Right.
So you have to think about, if you're gonna do that, you're gonna have to put together a list of those criteria.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. So how does the rest of the board feel at this moment? Do we want to continue to another hearing or as a work session or?
Is it possible for us to collect the points that are being raised now? And
Sure.
add whatever corrections we can at this point, or just keep them as questions? Two options. We could just create a list of questions that came up from the residents, or we could attempt to make some changes in the document, but that might make it a bit messy on there. So I think we've got two options. Any other ideas?
Yes, I think we've heard a lot today, and maybe a work session to go through the key points. And if there's changes proposed that the board feels are valid, maybe bring that to a future public hearing. But I think we have some interesting insight that I've taken in this evening.
Sure. So, but there are deadlines in order to submit anything for March. So, I'm not saying we have to rush anything. I just want to make sure we're all aware that, I agree. I think there's more work to be done. I'm not sure that it would be done in time to meet.
I'm not either, but I'll be cute. You want me to be cute? You tell everybody here tonight that we're not gonna have another hearing and we're not putting
No,
them,
no,
and they're not gonna show up. So we're not gonna have our work. We're not gonna get the input we want. But if you tell them we're having another hearing
All right,
this week,
all right.
people are gonna show, two people are gonna show up and we're gonna get a lot of input. And then we can still not put it on the ballot if we don't want.
Yes, that's
I'm
true.
just saying that
Okay.
if there's,
So we
it takes a
will,
lot to get people, it takes a lot to get 18 of you here.
so is it your motion to continue the hearing to the next meeting?
One more question.
Yes.
Even if we don't put it on the ballot, can it still be raised as a point of questions at the town meeting where there'll be a larger audience as well?
No, it has to be voted on and
It does.
by ballot.
It does. So you can't just put it out for a general discussion. Okay, just checking.
No, but I think it's, it feels like a good discussion to continue, particularly if we're going to start looking at master plan updates throughout the year, which will be happening, and there'll be a lot more community input opportunities during that time. So I think that we've like started that process.
I make a motion that we continue the hearing to the next meeting / information workshop, whatever you want to call it, but hearing, continue it to the next meeting.
Okay. Is there any discussion from the board? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. George?
Yes.
Russ?
Yes.
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 So, thank you all, and to be continued, and I think we try to come back with some, we want to try to come back with some language for some of the suggestions we've heard.
Yes.
Yeah, we compile them. Yes, and I'm not looking at you, Olivia.
Yeah, we have a lot here.
There is a lot. Yeah, and I think we all have notes to
Yeah.
share. So we will do that in preparation for the next meeting and try to put it out. Sure.
So it sounds like you think if you have another hearing, you'd get better attendance. Probably true. But you don't have a document to have a hearing on.
Well,
Except the one that you've heard so many comments on tonight. Wouldn't it be more logical to have a meeting, a regular meeting or a special meeting of the planning board to go over the comments that you've received and the comments that you've made yourselves and sort of assimilate those comments into a new document and then have the hearing on the subject of the new document? So the public has something to comment on at the next meeting, at the hearing?
thinking of calling it a hearing because we want public comment on any working document, not,
But there's no working document.
well, we have the one we started with.
Yeah, but you've heard all these comments and some of them, it sounds like you've accepted, not all of them, but
So if I could just paraphrase, well, I don't know if I'm paraphrasing or not, but what I heard was that people were frustrated that they were not able to provide input at our last meeting, which was a meeting, which we typically don't open to public comment, which is where I am thinking of it,
Okay.
except for during the special time period.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm thinking, and you can disagree with me, is by calling it a hearing, we're indicating that we are seeking public input
Okay.
as we work through it.
So it sounds like the next meeting is a hearing.
Yep.
So it starts, the format of a hearing is set, right? It's not a roundtable discussion. It's public comment. And then you go into sort of private session or whatever you call it. There's no document for the public to comment on other than the document that we've already commented on tonight. So it just seems illogical to me that you wouldn't assimilate. And I think Murray said this clearly a minute ago. It seems logical to me that you'd assimilate the comments and then present the document, the revised document, whatever it is, to the public for comment at a hearing. Yeah. Okay, I'm not going to
So is
belabor
it your expectation that we would come up with a document based on your input without having comments from the audience?
No, I mean, you made a comment that public input isn't allowed at planning board meetings. That's not the history. I was on the planning board for 9 years.
Except for during a designated time.
I know that's not my history. Yeah. So I would think you'd have a meeting where you all talked about the long list of comments and which ones made sense and which ones didn't. And they're fall into both categories, and revise the document. And during that process, perhaps you designate times for, peanut gallery comments. You don't let it be a, wild, uncontrolled meeting, but then you take that revised document and you put it out to the public. And, maybe we don't have time for this year, but better to do it right than have a lot of citizens saying the planning board, rush this to get it in. And
I think we have the same objective. We're just arguing semantics. So
well, it's process.
What do other people have? What are your thoughts?
Can I just make a comment here? We have had very successful forums in the past. I mean, 50, 60 people. This is definitely a forum topic. People should feel free to come in and discuss how they feel about it. And this hearing thing, I don't know still exactly what the timeline is to get it in this year, or why the necessity to get it in this year. But
I don't think there is. I think we're in agreement that there is not.
Okay.
So.
Okay. I suggest a forum because I think you will be surprised. You do need time to get it out to people. I mean, this was not much time for people to, really assimilate that this is important.
I feel like it's semantics we're arguing on them. So, but
It is, I don't feel right now that we're going to probably present anything to the town. I mean, maybe, but I doubt it highly. But like I said, I'm going to be cute. They're not going to show up in 2 weeks. If we tell them it's a forum, there's going to be 15 more people. But if we tell them it's a hearing, not trying to scare anybody, but I think the people will show up. That's all. I mean, like I said, I'm being cute.
Initially, the intent was to try and keep it simple to reduce the double acreage. It's as simple as that.
True.
And it's once we looked into the document that we found all of the inconsistencies that it suddenly opened up the bag of worms. So the intent initially was just to keep it simple, but we've now realized it's not simple. It's as simple as that.
Thank you.
You did a real nice job introducing this at the beginning. And I think what I'm hearing and what I'd like, what will works best with my brain is if you guys at the next meeting took all the input and come up with a revised version of this. And then 2 meetings from now, have a forum or a hearing or whatever you want to, and you do a similar introduction with, here's what we heard, here's what we picked, here's what we didn't pick and why. Because you guys have had a lot of really good logic at your meetings. So, you know, it helps me frame things. And I think and the fact that that's what, a month from now? There's plenty of time for people to absorb it, know that it's going on, advertise it, all that kind of stuff. And I think we get a better document that way.
Okay.
I agree with you.
Want to make that motion?
Nicole wants-
Or go ahead, Nicole. Can you use the microphone?
Government has their own sense of governance, right? So in order to have a valid hearing, you do have to have the language out.
And posted, et cetera. Yes,
So
right. Yeah. 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 So I was just thinking it was a continuation versus a new posting. That's all. Go ahead, Rose.
I encourage Dorothy to keep going with this, because whether you complete it in time for March or not, you're just that much farther down the road. I don't know about you guys, if I have a deadline, I work way better. And so, you know, if you just, oh, we're not going to do it now, then it's not going to be until like next October that you start working on it again. So, you know, so go ahead and use the deadline as you're motivated.
Okay, so did you want to say something first?
Well, I think related to some of the comments, I'd make a motion that we turn next meeting into a working session where we take public, input as we work our way through this and come up with a updated version of the document for a continuation of the public hearing, if that's appropriate to do.
Okay.
Second that.
Okay, we'll vote. George.
Yes.
Russ?
Do we already vote on the other motion to continue the hearing? Did everybody vote? Did we all vote yes on that?
Yes, we did.
Yes.
Well, we didn't set a date for it.
Okay.
So perhaps we can also change that vote to
Rescind the
rescind that.
previous vote?
Mhm.
We've never done it before. I think that would be the right way.
Mhm. Would you like to make that motion?
I don't, but George will.
What's that?
Go ahead, Olivia.
You did move and vote to continue the hearing to the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. So we need a motion to rescind that vote and we'll do a new one after that.
Yeah, so I'll amend that motion. So I'll make the motion, start over again, to rescind the vote to have the public hearing continue the next meeting and turn next meeting into a working session to develop an updated, to go through the comments and update if the board chooses to.
Can you call it a forum instead of a working session?
Yeah.
Yes, I can call it a forum
It's a
instead of.
forum. We want more public input, is that?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Or is this meeting designed for us to sit as a board and have a workshop?
No, I think we want public input.
Okay.
All right, so Olivia, I've changed my word of working session to forum. So it paraphrase, it'll be rescind the current vote and turn the next meeting into a forum to discuss the inputs we heard tonight.
Just trying to think if we have any other business that is pressing.
Nobody's gonna show up.
Yeah, I know.
We'll be right back to where we were. That's okay.
Okay, so was there a second? Second, and we'll do a vote. George,
No,
you don't want to rescind the earlier vote?
I don't think we should have a forum in 2 weeks. I think we should have a meeting. We don't get together but every 2 weeks. So
Mhm.
I think we need a working session before we have another public hearing.
So is that without public input at the next?
Well, we can still have people come to, because it's a public meeting,
Right,
and you can ask for comments. or
Right.
Take comments,
I think that was Murray's
That's-
motion.
but he said it was a forum.
Right, but not a public hearing. So a forum where we're working, but are willing to accept public input as we work is my understanding of the forum.
I'll abstain.
Shouldn't take 20 minutes.
One of the things I learned about Temple a long time ago was that forum has a very particular definition or meaning. It's a session where we sit around in a circle in this room and debate back and forth. It's not a session where there's public input, but it's really a working session for the board. So I think it's the word forum that I picked up on, and so did George. So
Okay. So then we're back to working session,
Would working session work for you, George?
a work session at the next meeting, and then a public hearing after that. Or a public forum after that.
Yes.
Okay,
Sorry. You have a motion on the floor.
so yes, so
And you're in the middle of a vote.
there's was not a second for his motion, was there?
Yeah, so a move to amend the motion, replacing the word forum with a working session.
Replacing forum with working session.
I'll figure it out eventually.
Okay, well, let's just do that for the
Yep,
next
that's good.
meeting
Yep.
and then see where we're at before we schedule anything beyond that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, is there a second to that amended motion? Thank you, Russ. And we'll vote. George,
Yes.
Russ,
Yeah.
Abstain.
oh, yes.
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 Okay, the motion carries. So our next meeting, we will have a working session to bring together all of the input and come up with some revisions.
Mhm.
Okay. The next meeting is scheduled for January 17th, 7 PM. For motion to adjourn.
Make a motion, we adjourn.
A second by Keith. Motion to adjourn by Bruce, second by Keith. All, George,
Yes.
Russ?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
thank you. Meeting adjourned.